Hey, this is Jody with weldingtipsandtricks.com. Today we're going to be talking about this 3-axis clamp from Stronghand tools. Before we get too deeply into it, let's do a little review on where we've been the past 2 or 3 weeks. You might remember a few weeks ago I framed up a tabletop for a portaband stand, a little portable bandsaw stand that I was building. And I even use these things in a way they're not designed. These little threaded parts, they got magnets in them. They're designed to go underneath the table for hold downs, but I used them for just a really quick way to get a 90-degree angle and worked really well. And you know, I plasma cut the miters on these things because the saw was broke. We talked about how we had big gaps and little gaps, but either one we could get around because we could just go downhill, sew up those big gaps with no problem. So had a few more gaps here and there because, again, this thing was plasma cut, not on a saw, so I decided to just prop it up and get it. The welds all about chest high, make them real easy to weld all those gaps downhill because gaps just weld better downhill. But about the time we got the tabletop done, before I could put the legs on it, hot job came in the door. Customer needs 2 of these as quickly as possible. So how would you make 2 of these and get them just like this with everything square and plumb and the same angles? Well, if you have a modular fixturing package, it's pretty easy. So I can get a 90-degree angle just by popping that 90-degree block up there. And the machinist cut the angles on the other piece. This is solid stock. And in just a few minutes, I can line everything up by scribing center lines and whatnot and get everything just about exactly as the original part. Not a big, huge deal. A lot quicker than just doing it by hand. So just using a quick pony clamp, getting one clamp to the riser block, it's ready for a tack. So then, in just a few minutes, had 2 of them tacked up, ready to weld out. And you might remember we talked about welding them out with 2 different techniques. TIG welding them with stainless steel, using 308L filler wire, using a dip technique like this, just with a little bit of oscillation on the torch. Dip, 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 and then also, in a minute, I'll show you a lay wire technique. 2 go to arc shot to cut short. And then for the little seal up the ends here, just leave the wire in the puddle because there's no real need for getting a whole lot of penetration. We're just sealing up this. Just a little bit of torch oscillation, keeping that wire in the puddle and everything shielded. Trying to motor on pretty quick so we don't discolor a whole lot. And then the other technique was just lay wire, just leaving that wire in the puddle and moving on about as quickly as it would allow, keeping a little pressure on that wire, keeping it in the puddle. And that makes for a good looking weld with only a little bit of discoloration on stainless steel, so that works pretty well. All right, so all that done, now we're ready to put the legs on this thing, now that we got the hot job done. We're going to use this little 3-axis clamp from Stronghand tools. You can see it's got some machine surfaces here, and here it's a casting with machine surfaces, CNC machine for precision. And for framing up, putting legs on a table or framing up some kind of box, it's a big, big time saver. I've just got 1 here. A lot of companies will get 4 of these things and clamp them down in a predetermined location on the table, whatever dimension the box is. But I'm just going to use 1, and I'm going to get all the legs tacked up real quick. Got those quick release buttons there, so you don't have to crank and crank and crank those screws in. And it's machined, so you're going to get a 90-degree angle every time as long as you have everything clamped up flush against those precision machine surfaces. So I've got things sped up right here to two times the speed, just so you don't, just for the sake of having a decent length YouTube video. You can see I've got a bunch of different pieces of metal up there propping it same height as the clamp. I'm just using the 1 clamp for tacking all 4 legs, and I don't even have it fastened down because it's heavy enough for a light duty job like this, just for the weight of it to support everything on the table. It moves around a little bit, but you know, doesn't matter. I think you might get the impression here that it's a quick way to put legs on a table or a box, frame something in, especially with that top arm and those little quick release buttons. Swing everything out of the way. pop it in there again, jam it up there in place, get it good and tight. Throw the upright in there, swing it down, ram it in, clamp it down tight, tack. I'm all for taking your time and getting things precise, but you know what? This is not a paying job. This is just to get me a quick little portaband stand for a quick way to hold my portaband in a vertical position for making cuts, and I'll show you why in just a little bit. So when I got it all tacked up, I'm going to zip all the welds up right here on the tabletop, just like this. For thin wall tubing like this, it's only 11 gauge tubing. I usually just use a little straight forward and back type motion and motor on pretty quickly. Doesn't require a very big weld. It's only 1/8 inch wall thickness, so you can just set the machine kind of warm and motor on. Now I've got these little feet pads here, and I'm not going to weld them on yet. I'm just going to set them as spacers while I put the casters on. We'll explain why welding them last is the thing to do later on. Putting little end caps here on the posts that are going to hold the casters, just for appearances and so we don't have any open ends with burrs on them. Not exactly the right size end caps, but whatever. And these casters, like all casters, mostly have these have a zinc plating on them, and you either gotta grind it off, hold your breath, or wear a respirator like I've got on here. I have found this particular model respirator works really good with most welding helmets. I tried it on with about 5 different helmets, worked with every one. This is a Miller Digital Elite, kind of narrow face on it, and because of the thin little filters there, works really well. I'll give a little freeze frame here of the part number in case you want to look it up on Amazon or Google or something. It's a good respirator for wearing underneath a welding helmet. Alright, I welded the casters on to these little short pieces here, and I've got them welded on little extensions like this because I'm going to weld the handle on the opposite side so that I want this thing to stay put when I'm putting pressure on it, cutting little things and whatnot. But when I want to move it, I just want to be able to pick up on it a little bit and wheel it around on 2 wheels. And it's really light. It's just the weight of the portaband on there. Doesn't need anything substantial. So this is just a good way for the weight of it to sit on the foot pads, and then when I want to move it, pick up on the handle, wheel it around, and park it in the corner. Alright, so I wanted to wait till every bit of the welding was done before I tack welded the feet on there. You can see that one's loose. It's got about a 1/16 gap in it, and the rest of them are pretty much touching. So that would wobble a little bit on the floor, and but I'm leaving the gap in there. I'm just going to get some 4 tacks on the thing, and then just a little bit more weld in that because I don't want that gap to draw up. I want it. That's what the whole purpose of leaving the gap in there is, to compensate. Now this tabletop is extremely flat. So I know that if it's flat on there, it's going to be pretty good for concrete surfaces. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to weld a couple little tabs on each corner. Just some little small pieces of flat bar. I'm going to tack weld them on there just like this so that it won't walk around when I put pressure on it, and I can pull it in and out of there. So this is how it's going to be used for welding, for cutting long things like this piece of PVC, so I can rest the long part of it on the table. And when I'm not doing that, I'm going to park it in the corner like this and leave it plugged in for just making little quick snips on little pieces of round bar, or all thread, or corners off of angle iron, or whatever. So that's it for today. And that's the 3-axis clamp from Stronghand Tools. And thanks for watching. Visit weldingtipsandtricks.com.